Have you ever stopped yourself from speaking, not because you had nothing to say, but because you felt like what you would say wouldn't be enough? That's the kind of silence I see in Todd Anderson. In Dead Poets Society, Todd is often described as shy, quiet, or withdrawn. But those words don't fully explain him, because Todd is not empty. He is internally active, observant, and emotionally aware. What defines him is not the absence of thought, but the suppression of expression. His silence is not natural, it is learned. In this video, I will analyze Todd's psychological development using confessional poetry and Carl Rogers' self-concept theory to show that his journey is not about becoming confident, but about finally allowing his real self to exist. Todd enters Weldon Academy already shaped by comparison. He is constantly identified in relation to his older brother, someone successful, accomplished, and recognized. Because of this, Todd internalizes a standard that he feels he cannot meet. This is clearly revealed in his line to me. You say things and people listen. This statement is not admiration alone. It reflects belief. Todd believes that a voice only matters if it is confident, certain, and validated by others. Since he does not see himself that way, he concludes that his own voice lacks value. As a result, he engages in self-silencing, not because he has nothing to express, but because he anticipates that what he says will not be worth hearing. This becomes the psychological foundation of his character. Confessional poetry is a literary movement that emerged in the 20th century, associated with poets like Sylvia Plath and Robert Lowell. Its core principle is the direct, honest, and often uncomfortable expression of personal experience, particularly involving emotions such as fear, insecurity, grief, and internal conflict. Unlike traditional poetry that values structure and distance, confessional poetry removes that distance. It prioritizes authenticity over polish and truth over presentation. What makes it powerful is that it gives voice to thoughts that are usually hidden or suppressed. Todd's character strongly aligns with this tradition, but in a unique way. He does not begin as someone expressive. Instead, he represents the state before confession, a person who feels deeply but has not yet allowed those feelings to be spoken. According to Carl Rogers, the self isn't just one thing. It's actually made up of three parts that all work together. The real self, that's who we truly are, with our actual thoughts, feelings, and instincts. The part of us that exists whether anyone notices or not. The ideal self, who we think we should be to get approval, to fit expectations, or to be seen as enough. Self-worth, how much we actually feel we matter, how valuable we think we are. When these three don't line up, Rogers call it incongruence. That's when there's a constant tension inside us about who we are, who we think we should be, and how much we think we matter. It all clash. With Todd, you can see this happening so clearly. His real self is sensitive, observant, and deeply thoughtful, but his ideal self, shaped by constant comparison to his brother and everyone else around him, is this confident, smooth, impressive version of himself that he feels he can't reach. And because he feels he's falling short, his sense of self-worth takes a hit. He doesn't feel like his thoughts or feelings are enough to matter. So what does Todd do? He starts to filter everything before it comes out. He holds back, he hesitates, he silences himself. And it's not because he doesn't have anything to say. He has a lot going on inside. It's because he's trapped in that internal conversation of, will this be enough? Will this be okay? When you look at him this way, his shyness, his overthinking, his quietness, it's no longer just a personality trait. It's a psychological struggle. He isn't invisible. He's just learning how to give himself permission to be seen.
Easy. Picture of Uncle Walt up there. What does he remind you of? Don't think. Answer. Go on.
A madman.
What kind of madman? Well, think about it. Just answer again.
A crazy madman.
Oh, you can do better than that. Free up your mind. Use your imagination. Say the first thing that pops into your head, even if it's total gibberish. Go on.
A sweaty-toothed madman.
What makes this moment psychologically significant isn't simply that Todd is asked to speak. It's that the usual process he depends on is suddenly bypassed. Because for Todd, silence is not passivity. It's a system. It's how he regulates risk. Every thought passes through an internal check. Not is this true, but is this acceptable? So expression for him is never immediate. It's delayed, filtered, often cancelled before it even reaches language. That's why the instruction "don't think, answer me" is so disruptive. It doesn't just encourage spontaneity. It removes the mechanism that normally protects him from exposure. And what follows is not confidence. It's disorganization. A sweaty-toothed madman. The line feels unstable, almost incoherent, but that instability is precisely the point, because what we're hearing is not a constructed response. It's taught in its raw, unedited form, before it has been evaluated, before it has been made acceptable. And that's where it becomes deeply aligned with confessional poetry. Confession, in this sense, is not about saying something meaningful. It's about saying something unprotected. What Todd produces here is not a performance of intelligence, but a moment of psychological exposure. For the first time, his voice is not shaped by the need to meet a standard. It exists without permission. And what this reveals, something that's easy to miss, is that Todd's problem was never a lack of voice. It was an overdeveloped awareness of how that voice might be judged. So when that awareness is interrupted, even briefly, what emerges is not emptiness, but something immediate, unfiltered, and undeniably his. What happens to Todd after Neil's death is not just grief, it's the collapse of the system he's been using to hold himself together. Up to this point, Todd has been able to manage himself through control, by filtering, holding back, and preventing anything too raw from surfacing. But grief doesn't pass through that system. It doesn't wait to be evaluated. It doesn't ask if it's acceptable. It forces itself outward. So when Todd breaks down, crying, unable to speak clearly, unable to compose himself, what we're seeing is not weakness. It's the failure of suppression. Everything he has been containing, fear, insecurity, attachment, dependence, suddenly loses structure. And what emerges is something unorganized, overwhelming, and completely unfiltered. And this is where the idea of the yoke becomes more meaningful. Keating defines a yoke as a loud cry or yell. If you think about it this way, then Todd's most authentic yoke is not the one produced in the classroom. It's this, because this is not guided, it's not encouraged, it's not even chosen. It's something that breaks through him, and that's what makes it deeply confessional. Confessional expression, at its core, is not always deliberate. Sometimes it happens when something becomes too real to keep inside. Todd doesn't decide to express himself here. He reaches a point where he no longer cannot express. And in that moment, his voice, though fragmented, emotional, almost incoherent, is at its most honest.
Captain, my captain.
This clip shows more than a gesture of defiance or ritualized tribute. It is a conscious alignment of his inner self with outward action. Throughout the film, Todd has lived in tension between his real self, which is sensitive, reflective, observant, and his ideal self, which is confident, polished, and socially validated. Here, under extreme emotional pressure, he chooses to act in spite of fear and expectation, signaling a psychological breakthrough. Unlike the poem scene or the great moment after Neil's death, this act is deliberate and autonomous. It reflects a shift from reactive expression to self-determined affirmation. Todd is no longer compelled by external pressure, internal control, or emotional necessity. He is acting according to his own judgment and values. This choice represents a movement toward congruence, the core of Carl Rogers' self-concept theory. His real self, his genuine sense of loyalty, courage, and individuality finally finds coherent expression in behavior. In this way, Todd's final act is not just dramatic, it is a psychological resolution, the visible emergence of a self that has been suppressed, filtered, and constrained throughout the narrative. In Mirror, Sylvia Plath writes, I am silver and exact. I have no preconceptions. Whatever I see, I swallow immediately, just as it is, unmisted by love or dislike. These lines describe a kind of perception that is completely direct, a reflection that does not judge, soften, or filter what it sees. And this is where the connection to Todd becomes psychologically interesting. Because Todd is not someone who lacks awareness. In fact, he sees himself very clearly. His fear, his hesitation, even his inadequacy. But unlike the mirror, he does not express the truth just as it is. His thoughts are not immediate. They are filtered, delayed, and often silenced before they are ever spoken. So instead of being unmisted, his perception is clouded by self-consciousness, by the need to be acceptable, correct, or good enough. That's why his moments of expression matter, because when Todd finally speaks, whether in the classroom, in his grief, or in his final act, he begins to move closer to the mirror itself. He becomes immediate, unfiltered, and honest, not controlled, not perfected, but real. And that shift from filtered self to unguarded expression is what makes his voice truly confessional. Todd Anderson's journey reminds us that silence is rarely empty. It carries the weight of unspoken thought, fear, and expectation. His struggle is not about finding a new voice, but about granting permission to the one he already has. Through the lens of confessional poetry, we see that truth does not always arrive in clarity or elegance. It arrives in fragments, hesitations, and moments of vulnerability. Psychologically, Rogers' self-concept shows us that growth is not a matter of becoming someone else, but of closing the gap between who we are and who we allow ourselves to be. In the end, Todd teaches us that the most profound courage is quiet. The courage to exist authentically, to risk imperfection, and to let our real selves be seen even when the world expects otherwise. It is in that fragile and guarded space that human life reveals its deepest resonance. And perhaps that is the true voice worth listening for.